Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Today's video is on my 1959 Series II Land Rover and all the issues I've been having with it. One problem after another. And now actually I've got it running pretty nicely despite appearances. And so I thought this was a good time to recap on all those issues I've been having. So as you can see, 1959 Series II Land Rover, as I said, I've had this about 3.5 years. Not one for the purists, extensively modified, I think in the early 1990s when it did off-road trials, roll cage, the fuel tank's been moved, modifications to the bonnet, a whole host of other stuff. And I got it because it was fairly cheap, I suppose, for a Series Land Rover, just for a bit of fun, pootling around these kind of country lanes and country roads. It's great fun. And also as a bit of a project to tinker around with. Although I've had it 3.5 years, I haven't done a huge amount to it, I have to be honest. I've replaced the door tops, which were very rusty, with galvanised door tops. It had a, I guess, 1980s, 1990s Vauxhall Nova style seat in the passenger side, so I've replaced that with a proper Land Rover seat, and thanks to my nephew for his help with that. And I intend to respray this underneath this pretty poor coat of white cream. Is the original blue. I intend to respray it blue. I just haven't got round to it, and my Series 3 109 Land Rover is actually in front of it in the respray queue. Anyway, today's video is about all the issues I've been having, so I'll start the story from where it all began. I was off-road on some green lanes like this, and suddenly I got clouds of smoke coming into the cabin through the transmission tunnel. Quite a lot of it, so obviously quite worrying. I turned everything off, let everything cool down, went off again, started, and everything seemed all right. And I thought perhaps that was oil getting into the transmission brake, seizing the shoes, which you can get from the rear output shaft seal, oil coming into the transmission brake. Drove it another few times and it seemed okay. But then I started to get another issue with the gear change. So previously the clutch pedal had been very stiff, very hard to use, and I thought I'd solved it. There's a pivot at the top of the pedal and I'd greased that up loads, and the pedal movement got miles better. But the gear change, the actual gear change, started getting very bad. It started becoming very hard to get in gear, get out of gear, and to fully disengage. So clearly there was likely some issue with the master cylinder, etc. I had a look at changing that myself. It's such a bodge job, and over the years so many weird things have been done to it. I couldn't undo nuts, so I had to take it into the garage. So that was to look at the oil leakage possibly into the transmission brake and also the master cylinder. So it did turn out to be oil leaking into the transmission brake. Got the seal changed, the rear output shaft seal, got the shoes of the transmission brake cleaned up. That was all good. And it did seem to be the master cylinder as well. So that got changed, and the gear change was fine after that. So extremely happy, looked like I had a working Land Rover. Drove her back from the garage and broke down 3 times on the way back. Nightmare. It felt like it kept dying. It felt like kind of fuel starvation or something like that. Managed to get it going again each time and limp home. And I investigated that when I got back. Seemed like a fueling issue. I had a look, and obviously there was some pretty badly perished and leaking fuel pipes. I think they were letting in air as well as being really perished. So I immediately changed those, and it seemed to work much better. So off I went again for a drive, tested out, and I broke down again. So I thought I'd solved that, and it was a similar kind of issue, seemed like fuel starvation. I realised that the fuel filter as well was really old and looked possibly clogged. So I managed to get home again. I did a bodge job. I didn't have a spare fuel filter, and just replaced that filter with a length of fuel hose, and she seemed to start, run, and that seemed fine. So at the moment, that's running fine in that respect. And I've got a fuel filter on order, so I'll put that fuel filter back in when it arrives in place of my bodge job. So I'll just show you some of those things I did under the bonnet, and then I'll continue the story and have a little drive. So one of the modifications of this is, instead of just this bonnet part coming up, the whole wings lift up to give good access to the engine bay, probably as part of its time doing trials. And I carry around these 2 stakes with me to prop open this bonnet. Probably not the safest, but it seems to work. If anyone has any better suggestions, do let me know in the comments. So there you go. Just show you in here. you can see the fuel lines here that I had to replace. These were totally perished and leaking or blocked or both. And of course this bit here was where the fuel pump was before going into the carb at the back there. So this is just a temporary replacement, taking out the fuel filter, which was totally blocked. I've got one coming in the next couple of days, so I replaced it with this bit of hose, but I'll put the filter back in there in the next couple of days. And then you can probably see down here a bit of weepage of fuel come from the joints around that fuel pump there. So that's the next job to look at. And then if I just show you the last thing I had to do under here, there was a crack in the exhaust, kind of around here in the manifold area. And this is a kind of bodge job weld. You can't get all the way back for this, round the back for that crack to weld it. But it's a temporary job, I think, given this car and what it's like. It's a bodge job all over. It seems to be holding, and that will do for the moment. So there we go. After all of those issues and spending a lot more on the car than I wanted to, as I said, I couldn't do all these jobs myself. I thought, brilliant, I've got a car that seems to be running quite nicely, started well, ran well, wasn't cutting out, transmission brake was sorted, wasn't leaving me in the lurch anywhere, changing gear all right, no issues with the clutch. But I took it out for a drive and I started getting a very worrying noise actually. So as I was going along, it was a kind of real rattly, almost bearing type noise, what I would describe it as. Coming from what I thought was the gearbox, it increased and got really bad with speed. So I was like, oh no, this is sounding very bad. Catastrophic, potentially kind of gearbox rebuild time. I took it back to the garage, to the guy who knows Landys pretty well. Turns out, fortunately, I say fortunately, still a fair job, but it was the universal joints, the UJs on the front prop, and they need replacing. So actually I was quite pleased, although it's still a bit of a job. That was a simpler fix than the gearbox rebuild, so I was quite pleased with that in the end actually. That's just got done. I've got the car back. I'll just show you those UJs now. So you can see nice new UJs on this front prop, and no longer any noises. And now I'm delighted. I've got a 1959 Series II that's running really nicely. It's great fun to drive. It still drives like an old Land Rover. You know, they're hard work, they don't steer well, they don't brake well. No synchromesh on these gearboxes, so you have to be very slow with the gear change. Second gear is a little bit of a knack to it. You have to double the clutch, not be revving too high at the time when you change into second. All that considered, you know, they're very noisy, very uncomfortable on the leaf springs, but I love pootling around the country lanes like I'm doing now. I'm actually on the grass track. They're great fun. I love driving them. They take a lot of concentration to drive because they are a 1950s car. But I'm really, really happy to have this back working and driving as well as probably I've ever had it going in the last 3.5 years. So really pleased. That was just a quick update. I'll be doing more on some of my Land Rovers and lots of other cars and my usual auction videos. Please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and thank you very much for watching.